In April 2018, New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell apologized for the involvement of the 1890-1891 City Council and Mayor Shakespeare in the massacre of 11 Italians. At Mayor Shakespeare's request, the City Council in 1890 had awarded a $15,000 grant to his Committee of 50 that organized the massacre and provided the Winchester rifles to execute Italian immigrants. The Committee of 50 held public meetings to turn New Orleans citizens against Italian immigrants with the phrase, "Who Killa da Chief?" a phrase still used today to taunt Italians. 6 Italians who had been acquitted of killing the chief of police the day before were part of the overall massacre. By the 1880s, Italian importers with shipping fleets, such as J.P. Massacre, held critical dock contracts. Massacre's 10-year dock contract would expire in 1892. New Orleans business leaders and politicians coveted those contracts and sought to control one of America's largest ports. The Italians were in the way. At the same time, New Orleans was experiencing multiple massacres for control of its docks, politics, and casino revenues. In 1866, Democratic Mayor Monroe ordered the police to open fire on blacks attending a Republican voting convention. 50 were killed. In 1874, the Democratic Central Committee routed the police in the Battle of Liberty Place. Casualties included 11 officers and 21 civilians. In 1895, the New Orleans dock riot would result in blacks being gunned down by longshoremen wearing Italian mustache disguises. Despite New Orleans' long history of violence and the acquittal of the Italians, no one else was ever investigated in the 1890 murder of Chief Hennessy. Authors of numerous books, as well as national filmmakers, continue to implicate the Italians for the murder of Chief Hennessy. However, detailed research may finally answer the question, who killed the chief?
I am here as this issue, in my opinion, is called for a formal apology. On March 14th, 1891, 11 Italians were made the victims of a lynch mob on the streets right here in the city of New Orleans. The city government at that time declined to seek justice for our people, and in fact, was implicated in the violence. That's why I'm here, and that's why I'm standing. What happened to those 11 Italians, it was wrong, and the city owes them and their descendants a formal apology. At this late date, we cannot give justice, but we can be intentional and deliberate about what we do going forward. We cannot change history, but we can acknowledge it and we can grow from it. So I want to say thank you to our Italian American community who has made New Orleans what she is today. It's a fact. It's a fact. For your contributions to the culture and economy, our landscape of our city, and of course our country. We cannot deny that.
Hi, welcome to our documentary on the 1891 lynching of Italians in New Orleans and the subsequent consequences that happened in the following years. You just saw a clip from Mayor LaToya Cantrell, who issued a formal apology for the involvement of elected officials in that lynching. A lot of people turned out for that event. The mayor did a great job, was very articulate in what she had to say. I'm with Judge Leon Cannizzaro, who was a former DA in New Orleans, who happened to be there. Judge Cannizzaro, it's a pleasure being with you.
Thank you, Charlie.
What do you have to say about the mayor's comments?
Well, of course, I had an opportunity to attend that, and we're certainly very thankful and appreciative of her taking the time to get up there and talk about that. To my knowledge, she was the first mayor who ever got up there and recognized the atrocities that took place in this city back in 1891. And so I know that everyone was very pleased to see her. We're very grateful and thankful for her doing that for us. It meant a lot to us and to people in our community. You know, as we look back on that event, we look back to the 1880s to 1924, 4 million Italians immigrated to the United States. Unfortunately, starting in around 1884 up until around 1920, half of those Italians returned back to Italy because of the experience that they had to undergo in this country. Times were very tough for them. They experienced a great deal of prejudice and bias. Their customs were different. Their traditions were different. Their language was different. They were darker-skinned people, and many people had a very difficult time accepting them and accepting their ways of life. It was during this time period when Chief Hennessy was in fact shot and killed. It's also interesting to note that during this time the country was in an economic depression, and so Italians were competing with those individuals who were already here for the very scarce and limited jobs, and that also led to some of the bias and prejudices against the Italian people in the city of New Orleans. The chief of the New Orleans Police Department, David Hennessy, was shot and killed on October the 16th, 1890, in his neighborhood, a very, very short distance away from his home. In fact, coincidentally, we're doing this interview right next to the Superdome, which is the neighborhood that David Hennessy lived in at that particular time. As a result of that, there was a public outrage, literally. Hundreds of Italians were arrested and thrown into jail as a result of the killing of Chief Hennessy. 19 of the hundreds of Italians who were thrown into jail were ultimately indicted and charged with murder or conspiracy to commit murder. Of the 19 charged, one included a 14-year-old boy. Those first 9 that went to trial, 6 of them were acquitted and found not guilty by the jury, and the remaining 3, the jury was unable to reach a verdict. They were deadlocked or hung. It was therefore a mistrial. The thing that's interesting about this trial, and so very, very disturbing, is as to the 6 Italians who were found not guilty, instead of releasing them from custody, as is the custom when someone is acquitted in a criminal proceeding, the judge put them back into the jail and prevented them and gave them absolutely no opportunity to escape the fate which was going to happen to them in a very short period of time. As a result of the verdict, given the air of prejudice that existed in New Orleans with regard to Italian people, the press, the media at that time, the newspaper, called for take justice into your own hands, take matters into your own hands, and the public responded to that. Literally thousands of people, mobs of people went to the streets making speeches, rousing up members of the community in an effort to try to get what they thought was justice as a result of these verdicts.
On Saturday morning, March 14th, a mob gathered at the Henry Clay statue on Canal Street. After being riled up by speeches, they marched to the prison, which today is where the municipal auditorium is. They couldn't get in the main door. James Houston, who knew the prison, said, let's go to the side door at St. Anne and Tremé, where they busted in that side door. They'd already picked the marksman to go in, so the mob stayed outside, where 60 men with their Winchester rifles were led into the prison with a target list of who to kill. They found the Italians they needed, and they shot them. While most men were killed in the jail, 2 men were brought outside and hung. Their bodies, as they dangled, became target practice for the men with the Winchester rifles. In the end, of the 19 men that were indicted, 11 were killed and 8 escaped death, including 14-year-old Gaspar Marchesi. When the smoke settled, there were many unanswered questions. The front page ad in the paper that day had been paid for by the Committee of 50. Who were they? What was their purpose? How were they created? The Committee of 50 was created right after the death of Police Chief Hennessy by Mayor Shakespeare. And then he got $15,000 from the city of New Orleans to fund their operations. So Leon, the Committee of 50, Mayor Shakespeare is so aggressive, he forms that the next day.
A ridiculous or an absurd situation where the mayor gathers some 82 people on this Committee of 50, and then he goes to the city council and asks the city council to appropriate $15,000 that is given to this Committee of 50 for the sole purpose of trying to investigate and determine what exactly happened as it related to the chief of police. A very, very unusual situation to have the mayor essentially appointing an arm of the prosecution, a prosecutorial body, under the guise of committee of 50. And really those are things that the district attorney is supposed to do with the help of the law enforcement agency. It just seems like the committee of 50 was pretty much running the show for the prosecutors at that particular time, and the prosecutors were taking every particular lead that was given to them by this committee of 50. It's absurd because some of the people who were on this committee of 50 were close to the chief, and some of the people, it has been speculated, were actually involved in the conspiracy to kill the chief. So they are basically bringing people onto the committee who are going to push blame away from them and push it in another direction, where they are never held accountable or responsible for the actual killing of the chief.
Their mission was to intimidate the DA and control public opinion and influence the grand jury to get the results they wanted. And when that didn't happen, they went ahead and took matters into their own hands and ran a full-page ad in the newspaper asking the citizens of New Orleans to create a mob to give them cover and protection as they stormed the jail to kill the Italians. What surprised me from the beginning as I read about this, at 11:30 at night, this gentleman, Billy O'Connor, brings the police chief home by a different path after detaining him with oysters at a restaurant. And the bodyguard there that's a police officer is not there, and he's not called, this J.C. Rowe. What happened to him? I mean, you have these two people that should have been witnesses and called to the stand, and the DA just says no.
We don't see during the course of this trial anyone who was an eyewitness to the shooting. So there are no eyewitnesses to the crime. These are law enforcement people, Charlie, and that would play in my opinion, to the theory that this is possibly a revenge against Chief Hennessy for activities he was involved in at some previous time. There was a great deal of discontent and strife among the officers within the department. And we also learned some years later in the city of New Orleans, an officer did in fact shoot and kill the police chief.
There were numerous policemen that were being laid off. You had the prostitution, the brothels. There was a lot of stuff that the police were involved in, letting businesses exist that shouldn't be existing.
If certain police officers are involved in illegal activities and they are laid off, that's a portion of their income they're no longer receiving because now they cannot provide the protection to some of the illegal activities that are taking place. So they would have a motive or a reason to want to get rid of this chief of police so that they might be able to resume their nefarious and illegal activities.
Hennessy's bodyguard, this gentleman, Billy O'Connor, he runs after he's been shot, supposedly, and says who did it, and he tells this guy Dagos, and the DA does not call this guy to the stand, but he's the only guy that heard him say this, supposedly. Hennessy lives for another 12 hours. He's in the hospital. He never repeats this to anybody in the hospital where there's more people around him. So the only guy you got that hears that word is O'Connor. And he left him, and his job was to walk him home. Why wouldn't the DA call him?
That witness is never, ever called, and that would be at least the basis as to why these 9 people are sitting here on trial today. And I have to believe, as a prosecutor, as a former prosecutor, I'm going to ask that witness, well, what did he say? Maybe he never even made that statement. Maybe that was something that was actually contrived by those individuals who wanted to go after people of Italian descent to hurt them financially, politically.
Who were those individuals? One of them was James Houston. Besides being on the Committee of 50, James Houston was also the leader of the Ring. As leader of the Ring, James Houston was the kingmaker. He picked who would be mayor. He also controlled even the governor's office of Louisiana. He had killed police officers on election night at a polling station. He had killed others before. In the year 1888, the Ring lost mayoralship for the first time to the Young Democratic Association, and Shakespeare became mayor. Thus, the contracts, control of the docks, and everything else, even the lottery of Louisiana, was at stake, and Houston needed that power back. He could not control Shakespeare, and he could not control the Italian vote. The 8,000 Italians that arrived were now voting against the Ring. The Italian vote factored heavily in the loss to the Ring of power. The upcoming dock contract was very lucrative in the city of New Orleans. And in fact, Houston's company got that contract within 6 weeks after killing J.P. Macheca.
There were certainly motives of others who were not Italian to want David Hennessy killed. There's no question about that. They would have wanted David Hennessy out of the way. Today, if there were certain people who were involved in government or officials involved in any conspiracy or an actual homicide, or even the cover-up of the homicide, you would think that the federal government would move in, because that's a part of their purpose, to go after people who are corrupt in government, where they would not figure that the government itself is going to go after their own people at the local level. So the federal government would move in. We did not have that at that particular time. We did not have an FBI. We did not have a U.S. Attorney's Office in place in the city of New Orleans as we would have today.
And they actually put a detective as a plant in the jail that was hired to infiltrate the jail and be a fake prisoner to try to get information. He got nothing.
They were hoping that in the jail he would mingle with some of the Italians who had been accused of this, and that they would confess. They would talk about the actual killing. They would talk about the conspiracy. They would give the state a motive as to why the chief was killed. None of this happened. Absolutely none of this came to pass. But they still went forward with the case with what was very, very weak and very flimsy evidence. A great deal of credit goes to the judge in this case. The judge essentially at the end of the state's case, and I have to tell you, Charlie, I think that would have been a very unpopular thing for the judge to do, to say to the jury, of the 9 people who were on trial, 2 of them, I am ordering you to find not guilty because there is no evidence to support a finding of guilt. And then the jury decided the fate of the other 7 defendants. And I don't mean to be out of line on this, but there were no Italian men sitting on the jury in 1891 when this trial took place. Those were 12 white men, non-Italian, who listened to the evidence and decided that 6 of them should be acquitted and found not guilty, while 3 were unable to reach a verdict.
Besides people who wanted the Italians gone, there were people who wanted David Hennessy gone. David Hennessy was very popular in the community, and he could have run for mayor successfully. That would have messed up James Houston in the ring even more, so they needed to get rid of him. But others also wanted to get rid of Hennessy. David Hennessy had actually killed his chief rival for the job, Thomas Devereux, in the year 1881, and he was with his cousin Mike, who was also a police officer at the time. They both got acquitted, but they were forced to resign from the police department at the time. A few years later, Mike Hennessy was shot and killed in Texas. Was there someone still looking to get even with David Hennessy for killing Thomas Devereux? Hennessy is also connected to a brothel called the Red Light Social Club. He was actually charging a tax for the brothels to stay open and not be harassed by police. Obviously, the tax is extortion. David Hennessy's death may have been caused by the numerous brothels he had closed down in an area that would become known as Storyville. An FBI or federal investigator could have looked at all the suspects in New Orleans who may have killed the chief of police. There were many that had motive. They could have started with James Houston and the Ring trying to control the political vote of New Orleans. They could have looked at the brothels and the Storyville angle. They could have looked at people wanting revenge for anybody David Hennessy had already killed. The federal investigators could have looked at the lottery. America's lottery was based in New Orleans at the time, from 1868 on a 25-year contract expiring in 1893. The lottery people, Charles Howard and later his son Frank Howard, were bribing the legislatures to be tax-free, tax-exempt. They were making $500,000 to $1 million a month. Frank Howard had already bribed the legislature of Louisiana to renew his contract. However, a public vote was going to be needed, and the Italians were getting in the way of them keeping their lottery, and they needed to be controlled or removed. Just as there was a committee of 50 that was organized to take out the Italians, evidence suggests there could have been a committee of 7 that was organized to take out the chief of police.
Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Thank you for accepting my invitation. The game tonight is going to be down the river. If you want to buy in, it's $100. It's $50 minimum bet. If you're feeling lucky, let's ante.
James Houston, thank you for having us here this evening. We appreciate the invite. You've done very well for yourself. Word on the street is that you're looking to get the New Orleans dock contract.
Yes, I want the dock contract. With Jefferson Davis's railroad coming to New Orleans from Los Angeles, the port is poised to prosper.
But my interest is getting the Louisiana State Lottery contract renewed, both at the legislative level and with the voters. I've already bought the legislature. I got them in tow. But my problem is the Italian vote, which is becoming very significant. This could end our business in Louisiana. The Italian vote could end all of our businesses.
The Italian vote will put an end to our power and influence. If they vote with the Republicans, they'll replace
the black vote that were eliminated by the literacy test. On the waterfront, Machica is doing well. The Italians are now working on the waterfront as stevedores. They're not union. The Italians are working for less than half of what the unions are working for. Those unions, they can't survive. We have to do something. We have to get control of the waterfront again. We got to take it from Machica before he gets another contract. And Mr. Houston, we got to get it to you. The Italians are buying farmland in Ketterville all along the river. That's going to be our problem. The Italians. What we're going to do about them.
We have to be rid of the Italians. They've already become the swing vote in the New Orleans City and the state of Louisiana elections. Now, my organization, The Ring, we've controlled the black vote through the literacy test, but that doesn't work with the Italians. We tell their ward bosses how they have to vote, and they don't listen. If we don't get rid of the Italians, that lottery contract will not be renewed, and The Ring will never again have control of the mayor's office in the city of New Orleans. All of us here are seeing our businesses close and suffer, thanks to the policies of Mayor Shakespeare and Chief Hennessy. Isn't that right, Tom Anderson?
I think you're absolutely right. Guys, everybody loves Sicilian music, and the cooking is the best that you could ever ask for. They're very gifted musically also. I can see why Thomas Jefferson included them in the U.S. Marine Corps band. But look, they're starting to buy land, and it ain't good, and we don't want it, and we need laws against it. Shakespeare and Hennessy are making enemies all over town. Shakespeare has Hennessy demanding cash payoffs or the police will shut the brothels down.
The beat cops and captains used to get paid by the madames to keep the police off of them. Now Hennessy, he takes that money and he gives it to Shakespeare. They call it the Shakespeare Plan.
Hennessy's part owner of the Red Lantern Social Club. It's where a lot of business in New Orleans gets done.
Let me tell you, y'all are right. The Italians are taking over the docks. They don't vote the way we want them to vote. I don't like it, neither do you. Hennessy is guarding these Italians against the unions, teaching them the lesson that we used to teach back in the day. Union strength, gentlemen. 85, we had the agreement between the Negroes and us working. It was working fine. The Italians are coming in, they're undermining our situation. Let me tell you the problem also. They don't spend their money. They keep it, they hoard it. They're not in the casinos. They're hoarding it away. They're buying the property as we talked about. They're putting up grocery stores. We got the pasta factories coming up. Before we know it, the French Quarter is gonna be a little Palermo. Is that where we wanna go? Mr. Parkinson, you can help us with this Italian issue, can't you?
Yeah, I can. And we're opposed to the Italian immigrants coming into the city. We brought the Italians in after the war. We brought them in to work on our sugarcane and cotton plantations. Our crop yields have increased because of their work. However, the Italians grow their own vegetables on the plantation and don't shop at the company's store. As a result, within 3 years, they're able to save enough to buy their own real estate, leave the plantation, and become farmers and importers. Consequently, our yields have decreased because the Italians left. Now, can you believe that they're our competitors? Macheca has been bringing in bananas. Other up-and-coming Italian importers are bringing in things we've never seen before. Pasta, oranges, tomatoes. The American public is spending money on Italian goods and not our goods. We have to drive them out like we did the carpetbaggers in the Battle of Liberty Place. We've kept the private militia. They're expert marksmen. Hennessy is going to run for mayor in the '92 election against Shakespeare. We need to neutralize Hennessy. We still have our Winchester rifles, 180 of them, that we used in the Battle of Liberty Place. Our militia is standing ready, and we'll do whatever we have to do to stop this.
So, gentlemen, it seems you all agree that Hennessy's got to go. The question is, how does he go?
The word on the street is that Hennessy fired Billy O'Connor.
Hennessy and his cousin Mike murdered my friend Thomas DEVEREAUX, the chief of detectives on the police force, and they got off with a self-defense plea. They then got revenge on Mike Hennessy in Texas. Someone took him out. And coming up on October 15th is the 10th anniversary of my friend Thomas DEVEREAUX's murder. Most members of the police force hate Hennessy and would love to see him gone. Some of them want to kill him, but they just need a way for it to go unnoticed. Devereaux's friends still appreciate how Mr. Houston used his influence with Mr. Howard's paper to help bring murder charges against Hennessy on Devereaux's death. Then Hennessy was acquitted. And then, lo and behold, Shakespeare brings him back to be the police chief. No one gets off better than you, Mr. Houston, in using a self-defense plea. In 1882, you killed Police Captain Michael Forche. So, Mr. Houston, what are you saying? Why are we here? Are we planning another self-defense murder?
We have to get rid of these Italians. We have to get the mayor, Shakespeare, out of office. We need control of the docks. We need control of the mayor's office and the lottery. Just like Hennessy murdered his rival for chief of police, Thomas Devereux, maybe something similar happens to him. The shooters could be former policemen that Hennessy has fired. Mr. Howard's newspapers could blame the Italians. Chaos. And who quells the chaos? The Young Men's Democratic Association. So, gentlemen, what do you all think?
Gentlemen, with Hennessy and the Italians gone, New Orleans is set to return to pre-war glory, and I will be the mayor of Storyville.
James, you did well. You got that ordinance passed, banning the Italians from the dock. Works out well for all of us.
With Hennessy gone, police jobs are now secure, and I'm in line to be the next police chief.
My papers was able to influence the New York Times to do an editorial making the riflemen citizen heroes.
The Italian vote's been eliminated. I expect to be mayor. We're gonna control City Hall. I think we're gonna have an Irish chief of police. And I think we are gonna make a lot of money.
Getting rid of the Italians is what my men were trained to do. And if they come back, we'll do it again.
So, Houston, who killed the chief?
Gentlemen, the secret to winning is the ability to keep a secret.
So who did kill the chief? We do know for decades, in the 1800s, New Orleans was a place of gunfights and massacres, as people sought money and power. Could the mastermind of Chief Hennessy's murder actually be buried less than 50 feet from him? We'll never know why bodyguards O'Connor and Rowe simultaneously left their post at 11:30 p.m., seconds before the shots were fired. However, now when Italians are taunted with the phrase, "Who killed a chief?" we have an answer.